Today, some business brain. It is my pleasure to welcome Yashbirla on this part trip. Welcome on the show.
Thank you.
Yash, I'm absolutely delighted to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Shobha. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
You have the image of a rock star. You are cool, you're glamorous, you have cutting edge style, and kids all over India think you're just the ultimate. How does that kind of gel with your image as a business person?
Well, I don't know if that's a compliment or that's a paradox.
Compliment.
Out of whatever I'm usually projected at, this facet of mine sometimes comes out larger than life, and that's what people probably identify me with. But actually, I'm a little further away from this. A rock star is basically a very overt, very extroverted personality, outgoing. Though people may perceive me to be that way, I'm actually quite far away from that.
So you talked about the real personality sometimes being at a variance to who you are. So who is Yash Birla?
When you talk to me, you figure me out, try and figure me out.
That's a good challenge for me. But your life has been quite extraordinary. I really call you Destiny's child.
Yeah.
You were very young when your parents passed away very tragically. You were studying. You enjoyed your studies, you've always said.
Yeah.
And you had to drop out of your university where you were studying for an MBA.
Yeah.
You were a good student at school.
Yeah.
Studious, you said.
I was quite
And an
studious.
introvert.
That's right.
So that must have been very tough. How did you cope?
Life has its plans for you and it prepares you for whatever's going to happen in some way or the other. It's how astute you are, whether you are prepared for it or whether you're not. I mean, this is something, it's like a calamity which, God forbid, doesn't fall on anybody in any circumstance. But I would say to a certain extent, life had prepared me for this instance to happen. As I'd always grown up with a very sound, moralistic, philosophical and spiritual background, and that being an essence of my personality, that being the main so-called facet of my personality, gave me a very strong foundation. So even though I was emotionally distressed after what happened with my parents and family, I never found that my feet were shaken and I was unstable in any way. As far as my mind to whatever extent, or my habits to whatever extent, I was always very focused, even through this whole incident.
That was the time when the Birla clan really came around and offered you a great deal of support, including your great aunt, the late Priyamvada.
Yeah.
And what was that period like when you had so many cousins, so many uncles who wanted to help, come on board? How did you come to grips as a business person yourself?
Well, it was a little difficult because obviously when you're with your parents, you're quite sheltered in their guidance, in their advisory capacity. And you never really look to the outside world to take advice on whether it's your personal matters, whether it's your business matters, in whatever way. And since there was nobody really, after my parents passed away, there was nobody really who I could rely on, an advisor, which I was at a very good proximity to before they passed away. I was kind of searching, you know, that who should I talk to, whose advice will be the best for me, who are my genuine well-wishers. And as you rightly mentioned, fortunately, the entire Birla family was very, very supportive of me, and they gave me the strength and the courage.
But your father, Ashok, was a very unconventional business person himself. He broke a lot of rules in his own way. He was the first, amongst the first Indian business people to look for an American partner at a time when Indian companies weren't thinking global. Yeah. And he lived his life on his own terms. And what would you say his big legacy was in your life? And how did he break you into the business?
In our families, we are exposed to business from a very early age. As early as first year junior college, which is 1985, I was made to go after my college hours to office, you know, and learn the basic, right down from the basics. It's not like I was sitting with my father as a chairman and him as a chairman and listening to what he's talking. That was once in a way. But what I was made to do is write a cash book, write a voucher, write a journal entry. You know, they believe in training you from the very basics of business, so that when you do come to the age and level when you are able to manage business, you know exactly how from the bottommost level to the topmost level the people think and react. So I was exposed to business from a very young age with him. You do say that he was a quite far-sighted in his times. He was in fact had very unique concepts, which he was actually I would say a leader at. In fact, the first mutual fund in the country was his brainwave with Warburg, an international company you might have heard of. He had actually launched the mutual fund, but somehow the board of directors had some legal complications because of foreign directorships, and it came to a pause. And in the meanwhile, the first mutual fund by UTI under Mr. Firwani, the then chairman, got launched. And he actually borrowed the idea from my father. And then my father never really implemented it because of these formalities which were a problem because of the board constituency. And then unfortunately passed away. So he was very far-sighted, but in some ways his implementation never really kept up with his...
Left off, Yash. We were discussing your father, Ashok, a person I knew very well and admired a lot. He was a very gutsy guy. What would you say is the biggest thing you learnt from him about conducting yourself as a human being and as a business person?
Gutsy, yeah. I think my father always says that if you live with your conscience, people who don't live with their conscience are the people who feel intimidated and do one thing in front of the public and do something else behind public eye. He always felt that whatever he did was with his conscience's approval, and he didn't mind living his life to whatever extent it was, whether it was indoors, whether outdoors, whether behind the public eye or in the public eye. And he was honest about it, and that's something which I really valued about him. He was a very honest, large-hearted, exuberant, very extroverted, which I don't think I was when I was in interaction with him till the age of 22. But he was just, and all his friends, like you just mentioned, always mention him with a smile on their face about the good times they had and the good moments that they shared. And he was just basically, both my parents were very light-hearted, sociable and accessible people, which is what I really respected in them.
Quite a variance from being a Birla. I mean, the Birla name itself comes with a lot of baggage. What does it mean to you to be a Birla when people say, oh, Yash Birla is coming?
Well, I think the thing you really cherish about a surname like that is not usually what people associate it with is the so-called wealth or the affluence behind Birla name, because that's not what I take it as, and I don't think most of our family members really give much cognizance to that. It's actually the culture and the philosophy which has been developed by ancestors and carried on even with the latest generation, is what I assess with the name Birla, is that our ancestors had a particular philosophy and code of conduct, and the way of doing business, way of conducting yourself in public life, way of their charitable dispositions, that whatever you earn, there has to be some kind of social obligation you have with whatever you earn. And I feel that is something which I really take pride in and I cherish, and I feel I associate the Birla name with that. And that's what I would like to instill in my children, that the Birla name basically means culture, principles, and a good social life, rather than just being successful monetarily, which is a part of the whole thing, but not the essence of it.
Your family was deeply involved in the early years of India's freedom struggle.
Yeah.
And is that something that also in any way engages you, the part of being part of modern India?
You know, in the house where I stay now, I've through the staircase from the ground floor to the top floor, I've got photographs of different people in my family, the elders, and different people from the freedom movement, including Mahatma Gandhi, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Jinnah, and a lot of Lady and Lord Mountbatten in my house, clicked at different times, and some of the photographs are actually signed by them, or they've written a sweet note to my great-grandfather or other people in the family. So it's like I'm living with that whole culture. I'm living with a house which has witnessed all these, the freedom movement. Mahatma Gandhi used to stay at my house. Vallabhbhai Patel passed away from my house. Yeah. My grandmother stayed at Mahatma Gandhi's ashram for 7 years. So it's something I've grown up with, and it's like a part of my culture, my upbringing, my values.
But what do you feel about the current political situation in India? How involved do you feel with what you see around you?
Well, I think we are all involved in it to the point of view that we are all businessmen, and we have to know what the political scenario is, and it has to be conducive to our economic growth. But let me be honest, I don't really take much interest in the day-to-day changes that keep taking on. As long as the government is stable and as long as it is socially contributing to the growth of the company, the common man, and in improving the business environment, that's what I view it for. Not otherwise. I don't look at which person is in power and who's ousted and who's in. It doesn't interest me.
Do you vote?
I do vote, yes.
Are you involved in the local Maharashtra elections, for example? Would you
No.
care?
Of course, I would care because most of my industries are based in Maharashtra, and the development of Maharashtra is very important to us as our side of the family, as a businessman. Apart from the social cause that we've been living here for generations, I would love to see this part of the country really prosperous. My wife is a Maharashtrian, so that gives me a little more attachment to the state as well. But honestly speaking, I don't really get into the intricate details of the politics that go on in the state or at the center level. It's just in a very broad spectrum.
Do you read the newspapers with the political news in particular with great deal of interest? Do you read page 3?
I would not deny reading page 3, but I would not give that also much importance, nor do I give the political scene much importance. It's something which I really give importance in the newspaper is, of course, I read economic times from back to front, because that concerns my work, and the speaking tree in the Times of India, which talks about spirituality. I read that every single day. And I feel the economic times and the speaking tree are something which I read the first and give it the most importance in newspapers.
But which is more important to you, to be featured on page 3 or to be profiled in the business pages of any of the newspapers? Where would you rather see yourself?
I'd rather see myself being portrayed as myself, as an individual, for what my personality is, for what my principles are, for what my values are. I won't limit it to a business page. I won't limit it to page 3. Yeah. That's fine also, and that's fine also.
Would you think that being on page 3 in some way takes away from the seriousness of what you're doing, what you're attempting as a business person? Does the business community regard you with some amount of skepticism because of...
I've heard that occasionally.
Yes.
That it sometimes gets to be a little bit of a negative aspect to be featured on page 3. But it's, again, as far as I'm concerned, it's not, I won't say I don't care about that, but as long as I'm not doing something, again, with my same father's principles which I've inherited, anything against my morals or my principles, people have a right to make the judgments. And at the end of the day, that doesn't bother me. As long as I'm dedicating myself to my work to the best of my abilities with full focused dedication and devotion, and I'm not doing anything immoral in my working life or in my personal life, because I have a very strict code of conduct, even in my personal life. Even though you may see me on page 3, I'm not really a page 3 type of lifestyle person. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I'm a pure vegetarian, I enjoy my home food, I rarely go out to eat. So as long as I don't compromise on these aspects, if I come on page 3 and people want to...
We're talking to Yash Birla about his page 3 image and how he deals with it in his business life. What do you wear for a board meeting and how do you conduct it? I'm dying to know.
I wear a suit.
You wear a suit.
And a tie, all buttoned up. And that's a board meeting, so I'm dressed up appropriately for that.
Okay.
If I'm going to a puja, I wear either a dhoti or a kurta pajama, and I'm dressed up appropriately for that.
Yes.
And if I'm going to a restaurant or to a party, I'm wearing clothes like these. So it's compartmentalized. It's not that I'm going to wear this to a board meeting and a suit to a puja. You are different things in your day-to-day life, and you dress up and you behave accordingly as well. It's not that your internal being changes. I am a businessman at work. I am a religious person when I'm doing my puja, and I'm a social person when I go out. So it doesn't merge or mingle.
How does your team respond to your colorful image?
Well, let's be honest, it's not really been directly dealt with, because that's not the culture of our organization. We are not so amicable having social conversations at work. It's more professional that way. I mean, let's say it's not still so American that you'd come and say, oh, hi Yash, how are you doing today? Where did you go out last night? It's not that way still. It's still a certain amount of decorum and, you know, kind of formality involved.
What do they call you? Well, how do they address you? Because it's a very conservative community.
Some people say Mr. Birla, some people say chairman, so Some people say Babu, which is our
Yes.
traditional Marwari way of addressing a
Yes.
boss. And in fact, the way they address me somehow symbolizes the kind of organization we have. There is an essence of the old culture prevalent, and there is an element of the new traditions coming in, the new world culture coming in. So it's like kind of a blend.
Yeah.
So that's why you have different people addressing me in different ways. But still, we've not come to the level where we can talk about
Backslapping and
what we did last evening and
How you're
what my
doing.
newspaper photographs are like, and it's not really come up. But I guess obviously everybody does look at it. But I'm not embarrassed about them at all, because as I told you, it just doesn't take away from the true essence of my personality, what I am, which is not just that. That's just an attribute, a minor attribute. That also.
You inherited a company that said 400 crores, and now you've taken it up to 1600 crore profile. That's an impressive growth rate for a group